Hey guys, Jam here, and in today's video I want to talk about should you get an airbrush, or maybe some of the reasons why you might not want to get one. So yeah, basically I'm just going to kind of go over what other kind of things you can do with an airbrush, go over some of the pros and cons, bullet pointed at the end a bit as well. So firstly, I just want to kind of talk about the fact that a lot of people seem to have like kind of negative idea about airbrushing. They kind of think it's cheating for some reason, which makes absolutely no sense, especially because, you painting your hobby the way you want to is not a sport, it's not a competition. I don't really understand that. Yeah, there are some things you can do quicker with an airbrush, but it's not like a magic tool. You just pick it up and all of a sudden you blending up the smoothest transitions ever known to mankind. It still takes a lot of work, a lot of practice to get an airbrush working right, to be perfectly honest. So what are the things that you can do with an airbrush that are just slightly better than doing them by a paintbrush or a rattle can or something like that? And well, the first thing that everybody starts on when they're doing an airbrush is priming. So if you live in a place that has loads of rain, snow, it's cold, you just, maybe you're having problems with the weather with like using rattle cans and stuff like that. Using an airbrush is an absolute dream. You can do it every single day of the year in your house, whatever time you want to do. Obviously, you want to kind of ventilate it. You don't want to be spraying up the whole place. But yeah, you can prime all the time. And another thing is a lot of people think airbrushes are extremely expensive. Now, they are a little bit pricey depending on what kind of... Everybody has a different definition of what expensive is really. But for me, for example, I bought a really cheap one. Cheap that came with the tank and the airbrush gun kind of thing. I think it was like under £100. It's really cheap. And the way I looked at it is when you're priming with a rattle can, say a decent spray can for priming, you're looking at least between £5 to £10, at least here in the UK. And they don't last that long, to be perfectly honest. They don't get you through an entire army most of the time. Whereas if you buy an airbrush primer, kind of like the Vallejo one that I use, I think it costs around £10. And I've had it for about a year now, and it's not even a quarter way through. So there already I've saved a lot of money just from that. I probably would have gone through like £50 worth of spray cans, if not more, by that point as well. But anyway, that was a bit of a slight tangent talking about priming. So you can prime all the time, anywhere kind of thing. It's great. Now on top of that, you can also quite easily do zenithal prime. So that's when you kind of do like a dark, say you spray your entire model in black primer, then you can do a kind of a light color from above. Now you can do that with rattle cans, you just spray white from above, but I find with an airbrush, when you kind of get the hang of it, you can get in a little bit tighter. So if you want to get that lighter color on a certain section of the model, you can do that quite nicely as well. Now I will say priming with a spray can is definitely faster, obviously, because it sprays out like a bigger cone of paint. Airbrushing with priming with an airbrush is a little bit slower depending on how you go about it. But I would also say it's probably safer. Sometimes, spray cans, if you don't shake them right and stuff like that, if you're too close, you can kind of hide some of the details in the model. That's happened to me once or twice, maybe not shaking it up quite right. Whereas with the airbrush, you got a little bit more control over it. Now, sticking to this similar kind of thing, after priming, the next thing you'll do when you get an airbrush is base coating. So especially for models that are like 90% one color. If you're doing something like, Gene Stealer Colts where, they've got a little bit of skin, they've got a little bit of cloth, they've got loads of different colors and textures going on, it might not be as great. But when you've got a model when it's like majority of it is the same color, like a tank, or like I said, Space Marines, then an airbrush is an absolute godsend. I used to spend like hours and hours putting layers and layers of colors on my Space Marines just so they can all just be one color. Whereas if you have an airbrush, you stick your paint in the cup, you blast it out, and you've literally got your entire base coat. So for example, my Space Wolves are grey. So I can blast down the base coat and I can get an entire unit done in maybe like 10-15 minutes. I pretty much base coated my entire Death Guard army in like maybe an hour or two, whereas before just doing like one unit would have taken me like an entire day. So if you're doing anything like that where a lot of like 40k models, Drukhari, whatever, Tau, normally most of the time the model's at least like 70% up just one color, then I would almost say you have to have an airbrush because it saves you so much time, seriously. And you get silky smooth layers pretty much every single time, depending on how you thin the paints down and stuff like that, of course. And on a kind of side note to base coating as well, another thing is with an airbrush you can also get really difficult colors down much easier. So for example, some people hate painting yellow and white. You have to do multiple thin coats to try and get it really smooth, whereas with an airbrush, once again, it all depends on how you like thin it down in the actual airbrush as well, but you can blast out white or yellow just as quick as any other base coat and you're sorted. But let's get to some of the kind of slight downsides now that we're talking about like thinning paints and everything. And that's another thing where like people always think airbrush is cheating. It's not, because first of all, loads of paints are completely different, so you're going to have to adjust your air pressure, so you have to get used to what your air pressure kind of has to be. You got to get used to what's the right consistency for every single paint to be thinned down, because if you don't, it's either going to clog up and it's going to splatter big blobs of paint everywhere, or if it's too thin, it's going to come out like really quick and you're going to like, it's going to spider web and there's going to be paint everywhere. You have to get things just right, and to be honest, it's just practice. Like I said, it's not a magic tool. And like I say, people seem to think you can just pick it up and blend up like a nice smooth cloak. But that's another thing as well. You can eventually build up to doing smooth transitions and stuff like that. Once you buy a really nice airbrush, you've practiced with it. That's like further out goals, like most things, like even with a paintbrush, you can get to a point where you can do really nice things really quickly with an airbrush. But if you're a beginner, that stuff's not going to happen anytime soon. And another downside to which people always don't seem to think about, apart from like air pressures, thinnings and stuff like that, making sure you don't have any leaks anywhere, you also have to clean the thing down. Now if you're using a paintbrush, you just flick it around in water, you're done. Whereas with an airbrush, every single time you use it or you want to swap paints out, you got to get all the paint out, you got to clean it through, blast all the excess out. You have to have airbrush cleaners. Now I know this might sound like it's getting expensive, but once again, a part of like airbrush paint thinner, I've been using that to actually wash out my airbrush as well. So between washing and thinning my paints, it's lasted me an entire year and I haven't even used half of it. I've recently actually just bought an airbrush cleaner for like specifically for cleaning, and that's going to last me a very long time. So once again, the price is not really that big a deal, but it's still a pain in the ass. You gotta, like I say, you gotta get all the excess paint out, wash it out, you gotta blast it through multiple times. Sometimes you have to take the thing apart and you gotta make sure it's not sticking, because I've had a couple times where the trigger sticks because I maybe didn't clean it out good enough. All that kind of stuff. And also, sometimes you use an airbrush for too long, it starts to heat up, and when it starts to overheat, it just shuts down on its own and you can't really use it for that long. I mean, this always depends on what kind of airbrush you're buying, if you're buying some expensive stuff, but I'm just trying to get out the actual facts of an airbrush and some of like the pros and cons here, because I don't know, some people just think it's like this magic thing, and it just kind of annoys me, all the negativity airbrushing gets, because it's just not a fact. But let's get to another thing that's a super good use of an airbrush, and that's using unique paints. Now if you've seen in this video as well in the background that I've made kind of reviews, especially at places like Green Stuff World and all that, they do a lot of like unique paints, like candy paints, like color transition, like chameleon paint. Like you get loads of different specialist paints which you can use a paintbrush for, but they just come out way better on an airbrush. So you're just opening up your entire toolbox having an airbrush. You can experiment with different color schemes, techniques, all that kind of stuff. And even, I'll have a look here quick, on Green Stuff World, they even have this kind of liquid you put into your airbrush. When you spray it out, it comes out like spider webs. I mean, that stuff looks incredible. Haven't used it yet, and I don't know how durable it would be for actually like using it for models you're going to game with. I'd have to test it out. But I mean, that stuff's incredible. You can spider web up an entire base in seconds. So I mean, if that's not a great reason to have an airbrush, I don't know what is. And another thing that's really great for airbrushing, and I almost completely forgot to mention it, is varnishing your models. So the same thing with the rattle cans. Yeah, you can do it with rattle cans and sprays and stuff like that. You can varnish, you can gloss, whatever. But once again, with the airbrush one, you're going to be saving money most likely. You have a lot more control over it. And another thing that's actually great for it is, obviously, if you're varnishing your models with a spray can, then obviously you can only spray it out. Or maybe you can spray it into a little tub and you can use the liquid in there with a paintbrush. But because the airbrush one's already in like a little tiny dropper bottle, I quite often just use the stuff to like gloss up small details. Like for my Space Wolves, they've got a lot of gems and diamonds. I quite often just use the gloss from that. But once again, that's not really an airbrush thing. You can buy that kind of gloss if you want to anyway. I'm just saying that's just like an extra little bonus about having airbrush glosses and matte satin varnishes and blah blah blah. But yeah, that's another thing that's also quite handy to have around. And one kind of negative thing I might put in there as well, if you priming and base coating like really big models, like big pieces of terrain or like an orc stomper or something, that could probably still take quite a while of time, and I might still use a spray can for that, especially with terrain, so you don't really care about the like getting into every single little nook and cranny too much. So yeah, some bigger stuff, airbrush is not always the best choice. Alright, and another thing I almost completely forgot to talk about was kind of like the space and stuff like that. Now, yeah, if you can buy like a fancy like spray booth or something like that, it's probably going to take up like half a desk or something like that. You're going to need a bit of space for that. So I can understand that part. But for me, for example, when I first started airbrushing, all I did was I got a cardboard box, cut the top out of it so my lamp could shine through, and I just sprayed in the box. I mean, it's kind of like, it's acrylic paints, it's water-based and stuff like that. I mean, I would definitely wear something over your nose and your mouth, because like if you don't, then I've had times where like the inside of your nose and stuff gets like black from the primer and stuff like that. So definitely wear a mask. If you can get some sort of ventilation-y booth thing, I would. But if you're starting out and you don't have too much space, I literally just had a cardboard box I put in the corner of a room, took it out when I wanted to spray in there, right next to a window or something like that, and you're good to go. That just kind of keeps the spray from getting all over your desk and everything, and yeah, you can definitely start like that. But yeah, like I said, there's probably a lot of things I'm missing out here, but to kind of like bullet point it here at the end for you guys, should you get an airbrush? I'd say if you're really into painting and you want to try new things, or even if you just want to crack out loads and loads of Space Marines and Tau and everything as quick as possible, or even if you're just going to be base coating and priming, it's just, I think it's worth it if you can afford it, of course. So like I said, priming is quick and easy. Base coating, any color, super ridiculously easy. Great for getting your Space Marines done quick. Eventually you can get up to a point where you're like making smooth transitions and blending. That's kind of one of the things I want to be experimenting with my Nighthaunt army, because I feel like that'd be a really great army for me to kind of test my skills with an airbrush. And like I said, you can use loads and loads of unique paints that you generally can't get great effects with a paintbrush. So obviously, like I said, you can do zenithal primings, you can eventually do blendings, all that kind of stuff. Now, some of the kind of downsides, like I said, you got to clean it, you got to maintain it. They can, especially when you're starting, you can have a lot of issues. You don't understand why something's not working, why it's sticking. You got to get the air pressures right, and there's a good chance you probably like muck up a couple models if you're too heavy-handed in the beginning. So yeah, don't expect it to be like a little magic wand where you're just going to crack out amazing models instantly, but it will definitely save you a lot of time, and in some cases money as well, and I highly recommend it, and I love mine, and I'm definitely going to be experimenting more in the future with mine as well. But anyway guys, I hope I've kind of covered everything here. Well, not everything, but like I said, some of the main points, a little bit of pros and cons here. If you've got any more questions, feel free to comment below. Like I said, I'm not an expert. I barely have experimented myself. I've only had an airbrush for like a year and a half now. But yeah, I'll try and help answer as much as I can. And if you liked the video, you know what to do. And also maybe check out my channel and subscribe if you haven't already. But until the next one, guys, bye-bye.